Hello, everyone. My name is Damian Julian, and I am one of your peers in EDS 3130. And for today's discussion board, we needed to present something in regards to extrinsic motivation. Having read through the material, we were tasked with identifying with some of the flavors of disengagement, like slow time, lost time, fake time, which I kind of like the most, worry time, play time, etc. Well, the one, like I said, that I liked the most was the fake time. And as a seasoned learner, through high school, this is my second time around in college. What I've learned over the years is that you have to know what your professor or teacher is expecting. And although you can't always be completely engaged because maybe, you might have a side conversation or whatever that might be, if a teacher is looking for that within their grading system, then it's probably would behoove you to make sure you're playing the part, or as they say, fake time. One thing that I've noticed is that from teaching is you'll have the one student who's looks the part, plays the part, but might not even be fully engaged, and then you have the one guy or gal who is engaged, maybe even more so engaged, but he's having a little side conversation about whatever it may be. Um, I can relate to that because at times growing up, I felt like I was that student. Although I wasn't completely showing the part, my mind was fully engaged. But I think it's also beneficial if a student is able to be engaged but still enjoy the socialization that they're experiencing, like working on a group project or whatever it may be, maybe even asking your neighbor for help. Well, if a teacher doesn't know that's what the student is doing, then it might come across as if, oh, there goes that kid again, right? So again, it's learning what your teacher's expectation is, adapting to their style of teaching, and just making sure that you're meeting the expectations of them when you're in their classroom. And like I always teach a lot of my employees or students or players, it's all about perception. If you look as if you are doing one thing, even if you're not doing it, it's how you're being perceived at the moment. So for teaching high school students, I say, listen, if you're hanging out with the wrong crowd, not saying that you're doing wrong things, but if you're hanging out with the wrong crowd, unfortunately, people will judge you based off that perception of you. And that if you do have aspirations to do something different, sometimes it's a little wise to just kind of stay within your realm, stay within people that are like-minded, so that unfortunately that you're not judged by other people or people in positions of authority. So just a little story that I wanted to share with you, which brings us to the next slide. Engaged time. So engaged time is basically, what you're doing when you have that student's complete focus. Are they, are you doing things like manipulating the classroom pace? Are you feeding the need to create for them to be creative? Are you taking the time to get to know your students and really like what they care about and what's important to them? The one that I utilize all the time, whether it's in management or coaching or teaching or instructing, is share your personal experiences. My students and my players, they're like, Coach is a storyteller, and I'm widely regarded as a storyteller on campus because I use my stories and experiences, and coming from a very wide range spectrum from life, um, living, growing up in poverty, having success as a manager or director of call centers. I've had a lot of life experience. I went to school in the '90s before technology. I went to college right when technology started taking off, and I'm back in school. You know, uh, many years later. I won't tell you the exact time, and things have changed so much that I am now able to relate to my students and anyone for that matter because of those experiences. So what I do is I'll tell stories about those experiences, and I'll use those stories to teach a lesson that I'm trying to instill some type of value with my student or player. You know, I was in HR, and there was an issue that came up of sexual harassment within the school. Because I was an HR manager, I saw a lot of that. And a lot of times, a lot of sexual harassment wasn't intended to be that way. It just a person was offended by some of the content of their conversation. And I explained to the children, or my students for that matter, that again, back to perception, it's how you're being perceived, how it's coming across. And you have to know your audience, and you have to know what's right and what's wrong. And I told them, there's certain things you just don't talk about in public. Right now we're going through a huge voting vote for presidents and new and Congress and all these other things. And you know, it's probably one subject I'd say just don't talk about because you don't know who you're going to offend. You don't know what that might be. Sexual orientation, you know, religion. There's money, how much money you make, or things like that. There's certain things that are just taboo to talk about within a group setting, especially if it's around people that you're not too familiar with. So it's always better to lean on the side of caution and just avoid those conversations. Now, one thing that I like to know is that because of, it's not just about the three R's, but I feel like if you're able to relate to students with personal stories, and you care about who they are as a person, then you'll build better rapport with those students. You'll have a better relationship, and they'll have more admiration for you because it's not just about teaching the three R's, arithmetic, writing, and reading. You're teaching them about life, and you can relate, and you are relatable. And kids, it goes a long way with students as they're little adults, and they want to be treated like little adults, and but they also like they want you to be able to treat them as adults and accordingly. And if you have to hold them responsible or accountable, it's a lot easier if you have that relationship with them. So last thing before we finish up here, one thing I remember is I was telling you about storytelling. Well, I'll tell you a quick story and how it skyrocketed my career. So when I was 19, I started working at a Fortune 50 company. A lot of you probably never even heard of it. It was MCI WorldCom. It was comparable to like an AT&T. And I was just hired there for customer service. And honestly, to be honest, when I first started there, I was just there for a paycheck. I was a full-time student at Metro. And again, this is in the mid to late 90s. And I had a really great boss who ended up being my mentor for my career. He would always tell these stories, and I found out through his storytelling that we grew up similarly, tough neighborhoods, played sports, things like that, had similar interest in music. Well, I appreciated how he got himself to where he got in his professional career. And I leaned on that as time went forward. And the reason why I even considered moving up within the company or with aspirations to become a supervisor or manager, eventually I became the director, is I was walking in one day and I was a very friendly person. I said hi to everybody. And one day I walked in, I said hi, and we call him bigwigs. He just kind of looked at me with this look like, who is this guy? And just walked right past me. And I was like, wow, that's kind of rude. I was like, just because you're in a position of authority, like you shouldn't just frown upon the peons, right? So that gave me motivation to pursue a career within the company and move up. And by the time I was 20, I was one of the youngest managers in MCI's history. Within 5-year period, not only had I moved up to senior manager in varied positions, manager of training, manager of HR, I actually became the director of the call center and oversaw 3,500 employees. And here's the irony of the whole story. That guy who kind of shrugged me off was my employee. And so I'll conclude in this. the what I like to teach my kids is that, never treat anyone less than the way you want to be treated, because one day they might be your boss and they'll always remember the way you treated them. If it's you should treat your peer or your employees the same way you treat the parking lot attendant, the custodian. That's how you should approach, management, teaching, coaching, et cetera, et cetera. And with that, I just want to thank you for your time. You have a great one. Stay safe out there.